Recovered, next slide, a fishing boat that, again, ignore me in the picture and look behind me in the picture. The bottom hull of a fishing boat that is 2,000 years old. No, it's not the one. Well, I guess it's possible, but no, it's not the one that Jesus was on. But it is from the exact same time period that Jesus lived. As they've dated it back and uncovered it, they have taken what is left. And I watched, wherever we were in that museum, they made us watch like a 5-minute video on it. And I'm not a scientist. Something about the mud preserved it or whatever, and so that's why it didn't deteriorate. I can't tell you all the jargon, but I know that it's preserved. I know that it's here now. I know they have it in a room with special lights because they don't want the light to harm it and make it, deteriorate anymore. But they were able to kind of rebuild from that hull to get an ideal size of 26.5 by 7.5 by 4.5 for the size, length, and width and depth of the boat, and that it could hold roughly 15 people, which would be pretty full. So if you look at that size of the boat, obviously, I'm sure they made boats bigger. Obviously, I'm sure they made boats smaller. And I'm not saying that's the exact size of the boat that we're on in Matthew chapter 14, but I am saying that's a rough generalization of kind of the size of boat we're looking at, which makes it, we talk about the Sea of Galilee and how it is more or less a big lake, not huge, not as much of a sea as the Mediterranean would be, or like going to the ocean on any of our American shores. But at the same time, even though it is a smaller body of water, you're in these handmade, man-made wooden boats that are a lot smaller and a lot less safe than boats as we know them. So once you take those two things and combine them, it is definitely still a life and death kind of situation whenever you're out on the water in the middle of a storm. And when we look at, so that's kind of like historically the geography, the size of the Sea of Galilee, the kind of boat they were on. But let's transition for a moment to maybe the ocean as a whole, okay? Their reverence for the sea was directly connected to, and it paralleled their reverence of God. Okay, it is no coincidence that the Greeks and the Romans, respectively, both have a god of the sea, Neptune and Poseidon, and I can't remember which one's which. The Greeks and the Romans came to the conclusion they're the same god with different names. So I guess I don't have to have them straight in my head either. So they both had gods of the sea, and there is this mindset and this connection between the sea and God. And one of the big reasons for that is it's something that we can't control. It's something that's beyond us. It's something that took people's lives. And also, keep in mind at the same time, it's something that blessed people's lives. They made a living from the sea. And so both of those things have this direct spiritual connection, and we even notice it. Let's look throughout the Bible, Old Testament and New. I need a couple people. Someone please turn to, next slide, please turn to Daniel 7, verses 2 through 3, and someone else to turn to Revelation 4, verse 6. Daniel chapter 7, verses 2 through 3, and then Revelation 4, 6. And these two passages are going to do a really good job of giving us a concept of the way that people in the Old Testament and New Testament alike, when you started talking about being out on the ocean or being out on the sea or being out on the water, like how they viewed it and how they looked at it as a very spiritual thing, a very God-connected thing. So Daniel 7, 2 through 3. Perfect. Thank you. And actually, we'll talk about that one for a minute, and then whoever has Revelation 4:6, I'll get to you in a second. So in Daniel chapter 7, you have one of the many visions of Daniel. Keep in mind, the book of Daniel is not spanned out chronologically. It is spanned out thematically. So you begin with all of the narratives or all the storytelling, and then the back half of the book, after Daniel in the lion's den in 6, Daniel chapter 7 opens up with all of the different visions of Daniel that have been recorded that he prophesied and told people about. And this very first one begins with it's not a perfect equivalent, but kind of just this eerie, scary place that's outside of our control. The same way that a little kid might be scared with an opening scene of Friday the 13th at midnight in the middle of a graveyard. Something that just sets us on edge a little bit. That would have been kind of the way that opening up a scene of being out in the middle of this ocean that's been stirred up by the four winds would have been. People were uncomfortable with it because it was something that they couldn't control. It's something that took people's lives. And so notice that out of that come these four big scary beasts, each of which represent a different kingdom, which is a big part of the entire book of Daniel, showing God's control over the rise and fall of kingdoms. But each of these beasts come up out of the sea. So even notice that that's where the scary creatures came from, was somewhere that they didn't have answers for, somewhere they haven't been to the depths of, somewhere that they have more questions about than they have answers to. And we're no different even today. Like, if you've ever realized with humanity and with the ocean, the smarter we get, the more stupid we realize we are. Does that make sense? The more we uncover, the more we realize how little we actually know. And I can't get you the most accurate percentage, but we know just this fractional percentage of all of the species that live in the ocean right now. The smarter we get, the more ignorant we realize that we are, which should show us the depths of our God, that there is someone at the very minimum out there that's bigger than us. And all of that is contained where? Contained in the ocean, contained in the depths. And so they understood that, and they even grew to fear it, especially when the winds were stirring it up and it was filled with a storm-type setting, all these creatures coming up out of it. Okay, and then the exact contrast, the antithesis of everything we just read is in Revelation 4:6. If somebody would, please read that for us. Perfect. Thank you. So the book of Revelation works. Chapter 1, you have God telling John, I'm going to give you a revelation. Chapter 2 through 3 is him beginning that with each of the letters to each of the seven churches. And chapter 4 picks up with this scene room, this scene of the throne room of heaven. And notice we talk a lot about the different emerald and jasper and pearls and gold and silver, all these beautiful aspects of heaven that are explained with the most precious metals that we know of. But there's something we often skip over and something we often miss. We jump too quick to the whole crystal idea, but what is Revelation chapter 4 verse 6 saying is before God's throne? What is it? It is a sea, and it's of glass. Why is that important? It's flat. It's calm. Have any of the people reading Revelation chapter 4 ever seen a sea that was perfectly calm? But they know that they have a God that can do that. And that's the mind-blowing concept as we're reading through the throne room of heaven, is before God there is a sea that is as calm as looking at a piece of glass, looking at a piece of crystal. And so when we start to look at the way they viewed the sea, their mindset was this Daniel chapter 7. It's something that we can't control. It's something that's bigger than us. Something that's connected to God, because through the sea, God is either going to take your life when you're out there, or God's going to give you your life and give your livelihood, whether you're able to catch fish or make a living or do whatever you're out on the sea to do. And since it's something that's outside of humanity's control, because even today, we do our best to harness the power of the ocean, whether it's to use it to power different boats or run different machines, but at the end of the day, there's so many times that we get overtaken by the sea, don't we? There's times where it proves to be bigger than us. Nature continues to prove to be bigger than us. Next slide. And we get in this mindset. We like to consider nature as something that is completely and totally at our disposal and that we can control, and that's just simply not true. We like to talk about, how we're going to soon be able to harness, the X percentage of the energy of the sun and be able to use it to power the world. And I think that'll be awesome whenever that day comes and that can actually happen. But whenever we get in conversations like that, we almost present nature as something that we've got this. Like we know exactly what we're doing. We're on top of it. We've got it covered. We know how to control it. Look at how we're using solar power, and look at how we're using hydropower, and look at how we're using all of these different aspects of nature, wind power. And we really like to talk a big game until a tornado comes through and lays a community waste, until a hurricane comes through and just decimates thousands of people's livelihood. And whenever an earthquake comes through and knocks out the entire city of Los Angeles, like, we're really on top of things whenever things are going smoothly. You know what I mean? And it takes little moments like that throughout history to remind us that there is something out there bigger than we are. And there is more than just us. And there's something that we can't control. Nature being one small thing on a very long list of things that we can't control. So we like to maybe act like that sometimes. But next slide, let's realize that when it came to the sea, if God wanted to take your life, done. That's the way they viewed it. When it came to the sea, going out on the sea, if today was my day to die and get caught in a storm, done. And if today was my day to be blessed by God with a huge catch of fish, then done. Because in all reality, the risk, I guess, of living by the sea and the risk of living by water is the risk of prosperity. I'll say that again. The risk of being a fisherman, like a lot of these guys were, the risk of going out on the water was the risk of prosperity. They viewed it as very life or death. It was very in God's hands. It was very spiritual. I know down in, I don't want to tell you wrong, but don't hold me to this. I think it's Tampa. I think it's in Tampa Bay. There is a dock down there where there's a bunch of shops and restaurants and stuff. And again, don't hold me to this, I believe it's called St. John's Pass. And down there, as you walk down the boardwalk, there is a statue that it's probably set up on a pedestal every bit of 9 feet high, 10 feet high, and it's this big carved piece of granite with this big huge wave and this little small fishing boat, and like the waves all curled up like you've seen on TV and stuff, and coming up out of the wave are 2 hands holding that boat within it. And then engraved on the back of that sculpture is all of the fishermen that have gone out of that port and never come back. And so we have just this concept that we even still hold on to today, if you live close enough to the sea, that your fate ultimately is not totally in your control. You can be the best fisherman in the world, or you can be the best boat angler in the world and still lose your life out on the sea. And they knew the exact same thing here in Matthew 14 whenever they went out on this boat. So you look at something that they put totally in God's hands. They vested it. And for what reason? Obviously, this is a little bit different. They're not out fishing. But it is worth noting. It's the risk of prosperity. It's the risk of making a living. Like if you want to go and look at every major U.S. city, every major growing, thriving U.S. city, do you know what you're going to find running across 99% of them? A river, a body of water. There's one major exception to that they had to pipe water into out west. Anyone know where it is? Las Vegas, Los Angeles as well. I guess the second largest city in the world. Had to figure out like, how are we going to get water out here? We're in the middle of a desert. Everywhere else, if you want to go drive down to Nashville, or if you want to drive up north to Cincinnati, or you want to go down to Atlanta, wherever you want to go, like we can find water and water close by, as water is often connected to prosperity. And that is why they took the risks that they took. That's why they took the risks that they took. Because with going out on the water, it could take your life, and that's a scary thing, but it also could make your life, and that's worth something. So anyway, next slide. Therefore, storms were not just a mild inconvenience. Storms would have been viewed as kind of a life or death situation, and would have very much so been considered a God thing. If you want to look at the story of Jonah that we studied Sunday night, that will give you a great indication of how they viewed the storm that they were in. What did they all do? Cried out to all of their gods. What did they wake up Jonah for? Cry out to your God. Maybe it'll work. You look at this passage in Matthew chapter 14. They look out across the water, and when they see Jesus, what do they believe they see? A ghost. For the Bible student that understands Daniel chapter 7, not all that far-fetched. When you've got these Jewish kids that are growing up on these prophecies of seeing, and up out of the water and up out of the great sea came these four creatures. It's not all that crazy as they're in the middle of the storm. They consider it to be, it's 100% a God thing, and they don't know why God's brought this storm on them. They're scared, they're worried, and they see something coming at them. Ghost isn't all that far-fetched now, is it? When you look at kind of their background and their understanding and how they grew up. So, next slide. Let's get into the text and let's walk back through everything that we just read. So, Jesus has just got done feeding the 5,000 in verses 13 through 21, and after he feeds all of them, as you have read before and know before, Jesus had many a great crowds that were following him. He decides in verse 22 immediately for them to get onto the boat and go out before him on the other side while he dismissed the crowds. So as they are making their way out into the Sea of Galilee, he dismisses the crowds. He goes up on the mountainside himself. That evening he prays. He's there alone, and by the time that he was done praying, the boat was a very long way off. And some of your footnotes may even say that many stadia, which would be the Greek word there, is about 600 or so feet away, so a good ways away. I guess that'd be a couple football fields. And as it's out there in the middle of this sea, again, big lake, it's beaten by the waves, the wind begins to overcome it, and they are scared. It's the fourth watch of the night. Again, many of you have footnotes, 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. And as it's late at night, they've been out here a while, they're getting tired. I don't know if you know what it's like to be out in the middle of the night on the water and getting tired, but it can be scary. The only thing that I've ever come close to experiencing that would be going bow fishing, and I'll tell you, we've never been in the middle of a storm before. Now, granted, we've been in a storm of mayflies before, and that's not a real storm, but that is crazy. When I'm talking, I probably saw 20,000 mayflies that night. I'm not exaggerating. And we had to scoop them out of the boat when we were done with 5-gallon buckets. Anyway, never been out in a big real storm before, but to be out on the middle of the water, it can be very eerie when you're out there and you're all alone, especially when you're being beaten and battered by the waves, especially when you're getting tired and all you would love to do is just get some sleep. You notice in verse 26, they begin to see Jesus walking towards them. They're terrified. They cry out, "It's a ghost," and they're full of fear. But immediately, Jesus spoke to them and calmed them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." So one of the first things that we notice within the text is that oftentimes this seems to be the pattern. This is the pattern with Jesus' disciples throughout Scripture, and this is often the pattern with Jesus' disciples today in us. We are fearful. The followers are fearful, but Jesus is there to comfort. We don't have control of the situation, and I don't know about y'all, but I really don't like not having control of the situation. I like being able to make all of the decisions and call all the shots and move all of the chess pieces, and ironically, we have this vain sense of security that comes from being in control. Because for whatever reason, and I'm as guilty as anybody, for whatever reason, in this vain sense of control, we believe that things are best off in our hands. And that's just simply not true. Things are best off whenever we place them in our God's hands, but we often allow our fearfulness to drive us into a state of, what do I do? What can I do? I need to do it right now. And we start taking action so quickly. And so these disciples, full of fear, see Jesus, and he reaches out with such simple comfort. And this just idea of him walking up towards them, and completely calm from everything that I can tell, says, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." It's I, it's me. It's not anybody that you've never met before. It's not the ghost that you think it is. It's nothing that's scary or going to take your life. It's me, Jesus. Do not be afraid. And here is where everything kind of transitions. Next slide. You have Peter that reaches out to Jesus next and almost kind of gets in his own way, which we'll talk about that here in a minute. But Peter answers him and says, "Lord, if it is you, then command me to come to you on the water." And it's at this point that you can justify this question a few different ways of what was going through Peter's mind, but just on face value, it seems that he doesn't believe him. He's like, before you come any closer, Jesus, call me out to you and prove to everybody you are who you say you are and not a big scary ghost beast from Daniel chapter 7. And so whenever he cries out and says, call me to come to you, Peter initiates a challenge. And for all intents and purposes, I believe Peter initiates a test. You'll find it in Deuteronomy chapter 6 after the famous, Mishnah, thou shalt love your Lord your God with our heart, soul, mind, straight, verses 1 through 4. It's down in the teens, like verse 15, 16, 17 in Deuteronomy 6, where it says, thou shalt not put the Lord your God to the test. And it's interesting that Peter seems here to be issuing this test. And even crazier, next slide, Jesus obliges. I think that's the right word. It's been a long week of VBS, and I might be making up words at this point. But Jesus agrees, and he agrees for the sake of their faith. So as Jesus says, all right, come. In verse 29, Peter gets out of the boat and begins to walk on water as he came to Jesus. I cannot imagine. One, keep in mind, we're going to give Peter a little bit of a hard time for putting Jesus to the test. But you also have to give Peter the benefit and the credit of having the faith to ask the question. And even greater, the faith to take a step out of the boat and actually try it in the middle of a storm. So as he does that, gets out of the boat, begins to walk towards Jesus, I can't imagine what's going through his mind right now. But verse 30, apparently something was going through his mind because he gets distracted. But when he saw the winds and the waves, the strong wind around him, he was afraid and he began to sink. And as he's sinking, which keep in mind, again, he reaches out to Jesus. That's his answer person. That's his go-to person. He cries out, Lord, save me. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. So when you have Peter going out to Jesus, it's partly for Peter's growth, it's partly for Peter's sake, and it's partly for Jesus to assure and prove to Peter and everybody else who he is. But we have to keep in mind who is watching. And I don't want to get too far into my Sunday night sermon for this Sunday night, but I'll just say it once and then not go down the rabbit hole. Far too often, we assume that what we are going through and what we are experiencing is only for us. Far too often do we have an egocentric view of us and God. Little beknownst to us, what if those blessings that God is giving is not for us, but for us to have an open door, or the hard times that we're going through isn't just about us, but for us to show an example to somebody else of what it looks like to remain consistent with our God even when things aren't easy. Far too often we take everything that happens just so personally, as if us and God are the only things in existence, when there's 100 other things going on. What if the interaction between Peter and Jesus wasn't just for Peter? Because keep in mind, Peter had the faith to ask to begin with, and maybe had the most faith out of all of them because he's the one that got out of the boat. So maybe it's not just for Peter, but what about those other guys watching that thought it was a ghost? What about those other guys that were snickering and talking to each other when he said, come out of the boat? Is he really going to do that? That dummy's going to drown himself. Like, what if it was for the other people around to grow in their faith? And so we get into, next slide, the takeaway. I can't help but think that this is a faith-growing moment, and I don't want to make it into a negative story about Peter because it's a positive story about him. But he seems to kind of hold up Jesus' plan to come out to them and eventually calm the storm. I can't help but think that, like, if we just rewrote from the end of verse 27 down, immediately Jesus speaks to them saying, take heart, do not be afraid. Verse 32, and when he got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. Like, that's a pretty smooth ending to me of where things seem to be headed. But Peter just had to jump in, and Peter stepped in. And it's interesting how don't we sometimes do the exact same thing? Don't we sometimes jump in and say, God, don't worry, I'll help. And God, don't worry, I've got the perfect plan. And God, don't worry, I've been thinking about this a lot. And what if we did it this way? Or what if we tried it like this? Or what if you just had me take the reins and do this? And we almost sometimes, we almost can get in our own way. The same way that Peter sometimes gets in his own way. But here's what I love. Here's what I love. Even, because I do it. I don't know about y'all, but I'll be enough to admit that I do it. I get in my own way. Even in those moments when I get in my own way and when I trip up on my own feet and I'm my own downfall, Jesus is still at work for my growth. And that's huge. That's huge. Because keep in mind, Peter, I'm glad they're having fun out there. If only y'all were having that much fun in here. Y'all yell back at them to show them how much fun you're having in here. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Thank you for the two that tried. I appreciate you. I appreciate you. Yeah, the three. Did you have a question? Or, yeah, what do you got?
I find it kind of odd. Peter got out of the boat when he asked Jesus, tell me to come to you.
Yeah.
And Jesus said, come.
Yeah.
But they didn't recognize it as him. They thought it was a ghost. And then Peter gives that question to him.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that, he called me by name, but he didn't call Peter by name here. He just said, come.
Mm-hmm.
So Peter, it's like, okay, well, might be a ghost, might be Jesus, whatever.
Yeah.
But all throughout other verses, Jesus always called him Peter or Simon Peter.
Mm-hmm. That's very true.
He says, come, he doesn't call him by name. So that leap of faith there, to me, is even stronger because Jesus always calls him out and calls him by name.
That's a great point. And it's a great definition of faith. You know what I mean? Because if he had given him that full assurance, then maybe it detracts from the amount of faith that he has. But absolutely. Any other thoughts? I'm sorry I haven't given you all a lot of time to talk tonight.
This is so Peter.
Oh, yeah.
He's always the one that jumps forward.
Yeah.
He's the one who got out of the boat.
He is.
He's the one who cuts off the ear. He's the one who says, oh, let's build tabernacles.
He is.
He's always out there. So
It,
the only man besides the Lord that ever walks on water just because he's that way.
yeah, and when we look at like routine Peter, it fits and falls right in because he does always seem to be the first one to act or the first one to speak or the first one to reach out. And something that's really interesting that I wish I had the notes for and I'd share it with you, but I don't have the notes for it and it's been years since I've preached it. We walked through and looked through all of the quotes and teachings of Jesus that were initiated by a question of Peter specifically. Everybody's like, you know what I mean? Everybody's like, oh, Peter sticking his foot in his mouth, or oh, Peter putting the Lord to the test, or oh, Peter acting before you think, or whatever. But like, it just consistently with the Peters of the Bible, Jesus takes them and does something amazing. Like Jesus takes Peter's quick response and quick question and is able to do something miraculous with it. Jesus is able to take those foot-in-mouth questions and give just some of the most powerful messages. Like quotable bumper sticker Jesus phrases. Like this is not obscure stuff. Like this is stuff that you'd know by heart that was initiated by Peter's question. Always. So anyway, looking at him, this is a great point to make that Peter is that one to maybe jump in really quick. And when Peter jumps in, he maybe even possibly could make a good case for holds up God's plan or throws a stick in the bicycle spokes. But what I love even more about it is that Jesus is always able to take Peter's just zeal and his faith and his earnestness and do something great with it for his growth and everybody else's growth.
Not baffled by it or
Yeah.
he doesn't stumble over it at all. He just,
Yeah, he takes it in stride. Absolutely. Absolutely. He does. He does the exact same for us today. All the times that we get in our own way, I believe that he's at work, bring about our own growth. Great. And I can't help but think when I just look at this scene, I'm glad this was Jesus and not me, because there's a big temptation there whenever Peter's drowning and when he looks up to him, Lord, save me, for him to not look back and say, you literally asked for this. This was all your idea. Like, it's not, you know what I mean? It's not like that Jesus came up with this plan and gave it to him and now he's drowning. Like, Peter, this is the consequences of your actions. And I'm glad that our Lord is much more gracious than I am, because I need that graciousness, because I'm probably the personality type that would have let him drown for a minute and hopefully let him learn his lesson that way. But ultimately, he pulls him up out of the water. And he's saved, calms the storm. Just this great moment for all of his closest, his 12, to come to know him from. Okay, next question. And this is going to make sense, but I'm going to need you to track with me for a minute. And this is Vacation Bible School, so I need you to channel your inner child with this question. Who is your favorite superhero and what is their power? I feel like I'm back teaching in the refuge again. Perfect. Favorite superhero and their power? Spider-Man. And whichever is your favorite.
Web swinging.
All right, web swinging. Able to shoot webs out of his arms and swing from them. All right, someone else give me a different one. And I know this applies to all of you, because even some of you old people have comic books still at home from when you were kids. I know you do. I know you remember these guys. Okay, the Hulk, and what's his power? Smashes stuff, absolutely. Superman? He's got super strength, and he can fly, and that's cool. Batman, what's Batman's power? Yeah, he does. He is, and Batman's power is being wealthy and trained. Batman's just got all the gear. And that's probably, I'll share with you, my 3 favorite superheroes are the 3 that I believe could actually happen one day. And that would be Batman, Iron Man, and Captain America. There's no planets that anybody's coming from. There's no special weird stone that someone swallowed at age 6 and now they can do crazy stuff. Like, you've got 2 different people, Batman and Iron Man, that are able to make their own gear and suits and, save the world. And then you also have Captain America with the special serum that they used in World War II, and that's how we won the war. But like, they're the most realistic to me. They seem like they could actually happen. Nobody had to come from a special planet or anything, and so that's why they're my favorite. Each of them have their own different powers. You've got like Thor with the hammer and the lightning. You got Hulk turning green and smashing stuff. You have Superman with his power, and Superman with his Batman with all that stuff. Told you it's late in the week for VBS. But the thing that's interesting. And if there's one of these movies that I haven't heard about, don't correct me on this, okay? Because thank you, I appreciate it. He's zipped up. Don't correct me on this. From everything that I can see from superheroes, next slide. What's interesting is their power often seems to be contained to them. For the most part. You might find some exception if you're one of those comic book people that are like, well, actually, in issue 556, like, okay. But for the most part, it's not like Superman can look at me or look at Scott or Joe and say, all right, now you go do Superman now. I've transferred this power to you. There's no way that Thor can just look at Miss Martha and say, all right, you can now take the hammer, wield the hammer. You know what I mean? Like, each of those superheroes, their power is great and it's immense, but it's contained. And what's so interesting about Jesus, especially in this passage, we have seen him multiply food himself and just feed thousands. Happened the passage right before this. We have seen him just walk up and touch and heal people. We have seen Him raise people from the dead. We have seen Him read people's minds and hearts and intentions and speak it to them to their face. But one of the most powerful things to me about this story in Scripture that makes it unique throughout all of the Gospels, this is one of the few times that we see Jesus transferring His power to make Peter able to do as he does, walking on the water. And that's huge for the grand story of the gospel. Why? That's what He calls us to, is to be like me. And ultimately, what is the greatest miracle that Jesus ever performs? Not a trick question. Raises from the dead. And what does He promise us? Resurrection. Jesus shows here in Matthew chapter 14 that His power is not contained to Him if He so wills it. He shows that it's not manifested just within this one person, and He can raise from the dead. Sorry about the rest of you. Sorry about your luck. Okay, He shows right here that it's not just Him being able to lay hands on somebody and heal them, or Him being able to multiply all this food, or Him being able to just, Matthew 8, speak and calm a storm, but He can actually share it with others. And they can do as He does. Walk as He does on the water, raise as He does from the dead. Dwell with God forever as He does. Because, spoiler alert, we can't do that one on our own. Even if we're sinless, even if we're perfect and sinless, we still have not earned or deserved an eternity with a God so much higher than us. But He is the one that is able to transfer and share that with us so that we can have an eternity with Him. And that is so important. But anyway, last thing I have is the last kind of takeaway, and it goes back to what we talked about last night. Another takeaway for you that you may need this week, I don't know, or may need 2 years from now, I don't know. There are going to be Matthew 8 times in life, and there's going to be Matthew 14 times in life. There's going to be Matthew 8 times in life where we cry out and we pray like, Lord, I'm not doing well with this storm right now. I need You to take it away. And He's going to wake on up. He's going to go to the hull of the boat. He's going to say, peace, be still, and it's all going to be over. And praise be to God whenever that happens. But also keep in mind that not all times in life are Matthew 8 times in life. Sometimes times in life are Matthew 14 times in life, where Jesus doesn't calm the storm until Peter walks through the storm to Him. Jesus is going to calm the storm, all in good time. It's eventually going to happen, but just not maybe in our time frame. Maybe it's going to require us walking through it with some faith. Maybe it's going to require us walking through it and not focusing on the chaos around us, but focusing on the Savior before us. And maybe as we kind of assess different moments or situations in life, we can think about these two storms and think about these two moments and consider which one we're going through. Because I don't know about y'all, but whenever I pray, I would like my answer delivered in the next 30 seconds. And whenever I pray, I would like, to be able to have that storm ended on my time frame in the moment that I ask for it. Like, God, I thought to pray to You, and I've prayed to You about it a lot. Shouldn't that be enough? Like, am I not doing the right thing? Am I not saying it right? But we often forget. We often forget the same thing we said 10 minutes ago. We often forget there is a whole lot more at play than just us and God. There's a whole lot more reasons, a whole slew of possible reasons for why God may be calling us to come to walk through this storm to Him. And maybe, I guess, the biggest question whenever we're in Matthew 14 moments, do we have the faith to say, call me to come to You? Do we have the faith that Peter had to even begin with? So anyway, do y'all have any thoughts, comments, questions, concerns? Awesome. Does anybody want to talk through how they're going to explain to their 5-year-old tonight that Sharknado's not real? No? All right. Well, then that sounds good. Y'all have got probably 10 minutes or so, and then the kids should be starting to come back over a little bit after 8 o'clock.